Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking a little bit about Locke's conception of ideas that make up the contents of our mind, which he treats of in Book 2 of the essay concerning understanding. Now we've seen this word ideas before among the rationalist philosophers that we've read earlier in the semester, and indeed all of the rationalist philosophers in some sense or other treated ideas as what they may call modes of thinking, modes of this substance or this attribute that we call mind or soul. But we also saw that for Descartes in particular, that ideas are treated all as representations. They are in different forms, but they all represent objects outside of our minds. And this more or less applies for Locke as well, but because of his empiricism, because of his claim that the mind starts out empty and then we add ideas to it, it's going to be treated a little bit differently. Now, of course, it's the case for Descartes as well that we do get ideas, that is, things of which we are consciously aware, through the sensations. And Descartes saw this as a kind of a mechanical process where our sensory organs were affected mechanically by material events and motions from outside of our body impinging upon our body, which somehow or other ended up causing a non-material conscious awareness in our mind. But for Descartes, those were not the only source of ideas. Right? Descartes also had innate ideas, ideas that we are born with, ideas that are somehow intrinsic to the very fabric of our minds. Not only were there innate ideas, but these innate ideas were ideas out of which we could derive further ideas. And so for Descartes, and I think in some sense or other we could see this as applying to rationalism in general, ideas can start out in our minds, some of them, as these general substantive concepts, elements of our understanding, out of which we can derive further, more particular and specific ideas and insights. That's not going to be the case for Locke. For Locke, ideas are a ground-up thing. We start from the ground with very basic elemental things and then are able to assemble more complex ideas out of that, leading to abstract and general ideas, leading to understanding of relations and other types of generalities. Now, as we've seen, Locke says that the mind is empty at birth. It starts out with nothing in it whatsoever. He uses two metaphors. Either it's a blank sheet of paper or else it's an empty room. And we don't actually start to get any materials in our mind until we become aware of things in the world around us through our senses. So we start out as infants, in Locke's view, as with basically very empty minds, nothing in there, and we gradually start filling that up with stuff. So this leads to Locke's distinction of two types of ideas that we have. His first distinction among types of ideas is that we have ideas that can be called ideas of sensation on the one hand, and ideas of reflection on the other hand. This is the most basic distinction of ideas. We have ideas of sensation, that is to say, ideas that we get through our five senses, and ideas of reflection, ideas that we have by looking into our own minds. He tells us that the senses give us distinct perceptions of things. And we're going to look at what those particular perceptions are in a few minutes. Right, so information comes in through the senses. We're stimulated by light, by tastes, by sounds, by smells, by things that we can feel. But the other thing that we can do is we can perceive what our mind does with those ideas that we get through the sensations. So it seems that the mind, if it starts out blank, it doesn't start out exactly as nothing in Locke's view, because we do have we are born with this ability to take the information that we get through the senses and to manipulate it, combine, compare, do things with it. Okay? And that's already there. Okay? So you might wonder if the mind is, in Locke's view, if he really has the right to say that it's truly as empty as he says it is, and he rejects this notion of innate ideas. Okay? In any case, okay, the second type of simple ideas that we have, according to Locke, are ideas that we get through our perception of the operations of our own minds. Okay? So notice that also introduces a kind of a priority to ideas of sensations. Right? Our minds don't have anything to operate on until we have some ideas through the senses. Okay? Unless there's something to think about, okay, there isn't really any thinking going on. And so our ideas of reflection, what he calls ideas of reflection, okay, those ideas that are born of our perceiving what our minds are doing with the ideas that we have, okay, they need something to reflect on. Either ideas that we get through the senses, or it can be other ideas that we have already developed through our reflection upon this observation of the operations of our mind. Now, Locke takes a little space in Book 2 of the essay, more than just a little space it might seem, to talk about sleep. So to understand why Locke is so interested in talking about sleep and what might or might not happen in the mind during sleep, we have to go back to the rationalists, and especially to Descartes. So when Descartes asks the question, okay, what am I in meditation 2, you recall that ultimately he comes up with the answer, I am a thinking thing. And he defines the essence of mind as thinking. This leads to his distinction of two fundamental types of finite substances that make up the world that we live in. There are minds, that is to say, namely human minds, okay? Human minds which are thinking things that are unextended, they don't take up any, they're immaterial, they don't take up any space. And then there are bodies which are material, extended things, extended in space, but inert with respect to any kind of mental capacities. They don't have minds, unthinking things. Right? So these two types of fundamental finite substances for Descartes. So, but this leads to a question, indeed, a kind of a problem. If the essence of the human being is that the human being is one thing, one human being is one thing that thinks, okay, what happens to that human being when the human being goes to sleep? Now, sure, for part of the night, we're all engaged in a bit of dreaming, and we could call that perhaps a type of thinking. It's conscious mental activity. Okay? But for a good portion of the night, it appears that we are in a kind of deep sleep. Okay? And if there's any thinking going on, that's not terribly evident to us, at least we don't remember it. But if we're not thinking, okay, then are we at all, since thinking is what constitutes our very existence? So the rationalists concluded that, well, we must be thinking, okay, reasoning to this position, okay, that we have to be thinking. Otherwise, that would mean that in every 24 hours, right, we go out of existence for a period of time, and then we come back into existence again, which will also create questions and problems for understanding our personal identity. If we're always popping out of existence and popping back into existence every day, then are we the same person, or are we somehow a different person? So all of this is very problematic for the rationalists who want to consider each individual soul as one unitary, individual, separate thing, a separate substance that exists as one and the same identical thing throughout our life, and indeed beyond, if there is such a thing as an immortality of the soul. Locke, on the other hand, will see that he's going to reject that. In fact, Locke says, it's certain that Socrates asleep and Socrates awake is not the same person, but his soul when he sleeps and Socrates, the man consisting of body and soul when he is waking, are two persons. So this examination of sleep in Locke is in fact Locke's critique and rejection of Descartes' cogito and Descartes' analysis of the soul. Now back to simple ideas, and there are three features, okay, of all simple ideas that Locke lays out that it's important to take note of. Okay? The first is that simple ideas are fundamentally passive. Okay? In other words, they are imprinted upon our minds. Okay? We don't create them. Indeed, it would be impossible for anyone to create a simple idea or for anyone to destroy a simple idea. They come to us through without when our senses are stimulated, whether we want them to be there or not. They're just there. Okay? And that's why Locke says these simple ideas, when offered to the mind, the understanding, can no more refuse to have nor alter when they are imprinted, nor blot them out and make new ones itself, than a mirror can refuse, alter, or obliterate the images or ideas which the objects set before it do therein produce. So in that respect, the mind is sort of like a mirror. A mirror is going to reflect whatever is put in front of it. Okay? The mind is going to absorb whatever is imprinted in it. And Locke uses this metaphor of the impression, right? Something being pressed into it, okay, like a printing press, or like the ancient metaphor that was used for understanding perception of a block of wax into which you could press a signet ring, leaving the identical form that that ring has in the wax. Okay. So first of all, these simple ideas are passive. The second feature, important feature of simple ideas is that these are what he calls the materials of all knowledge. Okay? Everything that we know is composed and put together out of these simple ideas. Here again we see that contrast with how Descartes and the rationalists treat of ideas. Okay? For Descartes, indeed, of course, we had ideas that we got into the mind through the senses. Okay? They were not the source, however, of clear and distinct perceptions for Descartes. And beside those ideas, we also had very robust, rich, substantive ideas, okay, that we had innately. Okay? For example, for Descartes, the idea of extension. Okay? That is an idea that we're born with. It's innate in the mind, and out of which we can obtain, in Descartes' view, all kinds of other ideas by analyzing and reasoning about the things that we can discover in that idea of extension. Indeed, in Descartes' view, I think all of geometry, all of mathematics ultimately comes out of being able to analyze that innate idea of extension that is within us to begin with. Okay? Not so for Locke. Okay? The mind starts out as empty. Ideas enter into it through these simple parts, okay? And we build up more complex ideas out of those simple parts. Okay? We can't do anything, we can't do that until we first furnish these empty minds with those parts, right, by observing the things around us in the world. The third element of all simple ideas, important to understand, is that these, in Locke's view, are basically atomic. That is to say that they are indivisible, they are unitary, they're determinate. Each simple idea is one distinct, indivisible, uncompounded thing. Okay? As Locke says, okay, each in itself is uncompounded, contains in it nothing but one uniform appearance or conception in the mind, and is not distinguishable into different ideas. if you think about that, you might realize that the things that we perceive, okay, and that we feel as if we just instantaneously perceive, okay, are in fact not simple ideas, but they're things composed of simple ideas. Take any trivial object that you might look at, okay, like a philosopher finger puppet. Okay, this happens to be Schopenhauer. So, wonderful philosopher. We won't be reading Schopenhauer this semester, but I hope all of you find some time to read a little bit of Schopenhauer. Okay, so what do we see when we see Schopenhauer? Okay, well, okay, there's quite a few things we said. Remember, Locke says that a simple idea is uncompounded, it contains in it nothing but one uniform appearance. Okay, well, we see quite a number of different shapes on Schopenhauer here, and light and shadow, and then we might almost instantaneously recognize that this is a representation of a person wearing a coat with white hair, and all kinds of other things. Okay, nothing is very simple about that at all. Okay, recognizing this as a person, even if we look at just one element here, like say Schopenhauer's face or Schopenhauer's hair, we may see a variation of color there. Okay, so if we see a variation of color, is that one simple idea, or is that multiple simple ideas? Okay, or what if we, are holding an orange or an apple or a piece of fruit? Okay? We have a sensation simultaneously through the sense of smell, through the colors that we perceive through the eyes. Okay? Perhaps the sense of smell will induce something that we can taste to, the texture of what we're holding. We have all of that together. In fact, there are multiple simple ideas all active at once, okay, that are put together in what we label with that word orange. The last thing that we want to look at today is Locke's distinction of simple ideas into 4 different types. This is based upon his distinction of ideas into ideas of sensation, that is to say those ideas that are fed into our minds through the 5 senses, and ideas of reflection, okay, which are the ideas that we get by observing what our mind does with the ideas that we get through senses, or also ideas that we already have through previous reflections. So there are 4 types. Okay? The first type is ideas that we get through one single sense. Right? Through the eyes we see colors, through the ears we see sounds, through the nose we get smells. So there are certain ideas that we get through one sense and one sense alone. Okay? And thus, like Locke writes, light and colors as white, yellow, red, blue, with their several degrees or shades and mixtures, are green, scarlet, purple, sea green, and the rest, come in only by the eyes. All kinds of noises, sounds, and tones only by the ears, several tastes and smells by the nose and palate. So you notice that Locke, he went on for a while. He had lots of color examples to give us. Okay? Note that Locke will also say that while we have names for many simple ideas, okay, there are indeed, almost countless shades of colors. There are countless variations in qualities and things that we perceive. So Locke thinks that the language that we have, in fact, contains names for, by proportion, a very small number of the simple ideas that actually enter into our minds. There are many more things that enter into our minds than things that we actually have names for. The other things we see with these simple ideas of one sense, again, which we've seen already, is that simple ideas don't present objects to us. Okay, we don't see, Schopenhauer or an apple or an orange or some other complete object that's never a simple idea. Simple ideas come to us really only in the shape of qualities, okay, mostly. Right? Now, so that's the first type of simple idea, those that are ideas of sensation and that are presented to the mind, entering through one and only one of our five senses. Now, Locke spends a whole chapter talking about one particular type of idea that we have through one single sense, and that is the idea of solidity. Okay? So about solidity, notice Locke says that this is an idea that we receive by our sense of touch. And the second thing that he says about this is that there's no idea which we receive more constantly from sensation than solidity. This is something that we encounter all of the time. Okay. He doesn't spend a whole chapter on any other of the uncountable numbers of qualitative sensations that we get through any of the senses. We will see next time, okay, why it is that he gives such emphasis, okay, to this notion of solidity, why it deserves a whole chapter unto itself. The second type of simple idea is the simple ideas that enter through multiple senses. Okay? So there are some ideas that we perceive not through one sense alone, okay? Like smells, like odors which we smell, or colors which we see. Okay? But there are some simple ideas that can be perceived through more than one sense. Locke has a finite, limited number of ideas that he says we get through multiple senses. Okay? These ideas are the ideas of space or extension, figure, rest, motion. Okay? And then he observes, okay, that these make impressions both on the eyes and touch. Okay? You can see that something is extended in space. Okay? You can also run your hand along that object and feel that it has extension in space. So the second types, ideas that are perceived through multiple senses. The third type is ideas that are had from reflection alone. Okay? So these we've seen before. Okay? These are things like remembering, discerning, reasoning, judging, knowing, willing. Okay? So these are simple ideas of observing our own operations of mind. Okay? And then the fourth type are a small set of ideas, again a finite list, a small set of ideas that we have through both sensation and reflection. These are pleasure and its opposite, pain, okay? Power, existence, unity. And he'll examine all of those in more detail later in the book. That's all for today. Next time we will take a look at another important distinction that Locke makes about the simple ideas that we apprehend, namely the distinction between what he calls primary qualities and secondary qualities.